Okay, today what I want to do is kind of give an overview of chapters 12, 13, and 14. And these are the chapters, well, let's see, 9, what is it, 9, 10, or 10 through 14. That'll be on the final test. So let's go through these chapters. I may just get through 12 and 13 and then start a different video recording a different day, maybe tomorrow before the weekend, to cover chapter 14. We'll just see how far we get. And here I'm also going to run or open some of these HTML documents up, and we'll take a look at them, see what they're doing with the CSS, how they've modified it. And should any of you come online or see the public video recording going on live, feel free to join and ask any questions that you might have. Or if you want me to take a look at your final project and have any questions about that, just let me know. Okay, here we go. In the chapter 12 chapter, in the chapter covering HTML5, which is chapter 12, we did talk a little bit about it on Monday evening, and we got to the part where it had you to put all of these into the HTML code for Starbuzz. And what we did is we swapped out some new HTML elements that are only available if you use doc type HTML5, which it doesn't say 5, it just says doc type HTML. And these are more logical type of HTML elements. So in these cases, instead of having to say div and then set up a class or an ID, some of them, such as footer, you can just simply use the footer element. So after they put that in to the HTML, the first time it came up with what you're seeing here on the screen. It says, uh-oh, looks like things didn't work so well. And so they're going to have to do some modification. And that's what we're going to look at. But before we continue, we want to look at this little TV blurb, old-time TV blurb, that says older browsers do not support the new elements in HTML5 that we'll be using in this chapter. So the elements we're using in this chapter are new to HTML5 and aren't well supported in browsers such as IE8 and earlier, Safari 3 and earlier. If you are concerned that your web page might be used by people who are still using these old browsers, then don't use these new elements yet. But mobile browsers and smartphones like Android and iPhone support these new elements. So if your primary audience target is mobile users, then you're good to go. Check this website for updates on browser support of the elements in this chapter. So if we were to go out to this website, it would tell us which browser versions will indeed allow you to use these new HTML5 elements. And it should be, you know, people should be using the newer browsers, but if they have really old computers, you know, every time you download or upgrade your browser, it causes you it sometimes can degrade the speed of what's going on in your browser. So some people choose not to. And so sometimes if you know that you have a lot of users that are not using the most current browsers and you want those users to be able to see your website, then you probably need to put a disclaimer on your website that you are using HTML5, and if they want to view it properly, they need to be using, and you can list off the browsers that will view HTML5 properly. And those are some of the things that you have to determine in that first part where we said target audience, who's your target audience, what's the purpose, what's the goals here. So some of it may be that you have a select group that you are targeting, and then it won't make a difference. Okay, so let's update the CSS to reflect the new elements, and that's what they did here. So this was test drive number 2. What's the point of adding the new HTML5 markup if it has no visual effect on the page? Well, here it tells you why to do that, because eventually that's going to be the acceptable code, and hopefully the content is more logical, the tags are. Even though you have to actually look at the HTML markup to see the difference. Okay. Down here, you've already replaced certain ones. And then the second part is talking about using the display property of table table row or table column, so that you don't actually logically put the data or the HTML in tables and rows, but you use the same type of display that you would be using if it was in a table. Here's how it is, and then there's where they put it in table cell. You do still need the IDs for these sections. The reason being, it'll tell you down here, there's the new section element that you can use. And then it has you also create a blog. And so you actually create a separate page for a blog. And the good thing about these new elements is that there are so many people doing blogs and including blogs on their website that they created an element called article. A lot of these are really beneficial for a blog page. And so this next section has you to go in and redo the Starbuzz blog page, or building the Starbuzz blog page. And when you get finished, and you know, I do understand that the code that was in chapter 12 looks like it's got one that's the completed and one that is not. So please do the one, go in and type in the code, because that's the best way to learn it. And I do understand maybe some of you all don't intend on coding HTML after this class, but it is something that's really beneficial if you are in graphic design. All right, so here it has you create that blog page, take it for a test run, and it says, yes, it can be confusing. We'll tell you right up front that there's no crystal clear answer to this. In fact, there are many ways to use article and section, but here is a general way to think about them. You would use a section to group together related content and an article to enclose. Oops, I was going to highlight that. It didn't let me stick to it. I'll just go ahead and highlight that one. So content like a news article, a blog post, or a short report is what you would use article for. In the Starbuzz page, each column contains related content. So we've treated each column as a section of the page. We've also taken, oops, where'd that go? Let's see. We've also taken the individual blog post and made those articles because they are self-contained. You could even imagine taking one and reposting it on another site or blog. So your mileage may vary, but in general, stick to grouping related content together with section, and for self-contained content, use article. And if you need to group content together that doesn't feel as related, you always have div to fall back on. I must have got this off of the scrolling view. No, it says it's doing it. Okay. So we still need to add a date to the blog. And so here there is also a time element. And this is very helpful, a 2-minute guide to the time element. So here's how to use it. If you're using the date time option or attribute to specify a date, then the content for the element most often, that will be some date or time-related text like February 18th, 2012, or even yesterday or now. So here's date time, and there's what it links to. The date time attribute is required if the content of the element isn't written using the official internet date time format. This is the official internet format for specifying dates with a day, month, and year. You can specify just a year and month, or even just a year. So there's some other ways to do it. If you use a Z after the date and time, then it means UTC time. So you can experiment with that. You can also go out to that site that I showed you all before, where you can get reference to HTML5, and you should be able to see where they're using this time date and date time stamp. In fact, let me look right now. There's two areas that we can go to. We can go to W3 Schools. And let's see, HTML5, let's look at it. What is new? The doc type. And remember, we talked about all of this. Here's an HTML5 example. Here's some more examples. The most interesting new elements are here. New form control attributes. There's the time and the date, calendar, range, number. Here's for graphics. Canvas, SVG. Here's new multimedia elements. So new HTML5 application programming interfaces. That means the HTML can directly interact with these apps. Geolocation, drag and drop, local storage, application cache, web workers, and SSE. So elements that are removed in HTML5, the following HTML4 elements have been removed. And it tells you what to use instead right here, which is very good. HTML history, Tim Berners-Lee invented the www. Tim Berners-Lee invented HTML. Dave Raggett drafted HTML+. So this is just a little history of it. And it tells you just a little bit about the HTML. Okay, let's go to the next chapter. And so we have HTML5 browser support here. Block elements, adding new elements. So you can practice with things, because you can see here on the side, here's forms, what's all of this? Tables, HTML tables, HTML tutorial. So it goes into all this, and then right here is intro, element, semantics, migration, and a style guide. Let's see. This one, oops, how did that do that? It wasn't. See if it'll go to style guide. There it is, and coding conventions. So here is where we can find more what HTML5 allows mixing uppercase and lowercase letters and element names. We recommend using lowercase element names. Mixing names is bad. Developers are used to use lowercase names as an XHTML. Lowercase look cleaner. Lowercase are easier to write. So it says to be sure that you close all the elements, even close empty elements. The slash is required. If you expect XML software to access your page, it might be a good idea to keep that rule. So like on the meta tag, it's putting that / just before the closing bracket. Anyway, it would be good to go through this, and also I believe, let me see, I believe that Code Academy also has HTML, but let me make sure. See if I can get it back to, no, let's see. Thank you. Okay, let me see. Well, this is showing where I was learning Python. Let me see if I can get it to go back to Codecademy at the beginning. Let's see. I don't want to see the course. Web develop, learn to build. There's an HTML thing here. Let me just make a website. Let me see if this has HTML on it. I can't remember. Web pages, yes. Okay, so here's a place that you can learn. Tap each button to see what happens when you add in HTML. Okay, so if we go brand. Okay, got it. Okay, got it. Heading elements. So yeah, this goes through in Codecademy and lets you learn HTML. So there should be some HTML5 stuff in here too. So if you just keep going forward, also you should create a login. It doesn't cost you anything. It's free and you can learn all kinds of web stuff here. All right, so let's go back to our textbook here. At the end, how to add more header elements. This is just, if you just step through this, there shouldn't been any problems. Hopefully you've already done this chapter. I just wanted to give an overview of it and make sure that there was nothing that we missed. Let's see. Okay, here's social media, 2-minute guide to the, oh, we already did that. Let's see, 565. Let me look, see where we're at exactly. Okay, 565. Okay, and see if I can find adding the time. Okay, so the next one we've already done. Let's see. Okay, adding the navigation CSS. Now this is important because we have put our navigation list as an unordered list in our structured code, and we need to have it where we would want it to appear in our structured code before we add the CSS. And then when we add the CSS, we can actually put it wherever we want. But you notice the whole unordered list can have a style. We're adding a background color, margins, list style type, none. There are, this is what removes the bullets from the list items. Padding. Okay, then here is an unordered list item. So it says to display it in line, and because normally it's displayed as blocks, so now the list items won't have a carriage return before and after, because they would otherwise be spaced out with a line before and a line after. They'll all flow into one line on the page like regular inline elements do. Here's an unordered list item if it's a link, how they want it formatted. And finally, we're setting the background of the LI element with the class selected, so the navigation item corresponding to the page we're on looks different from the rest. So who needs GPS? Giving the navigation a test drive. Okay, that's what we do next here. You add the nav element, which if you look over here, I have all of this. I opened up the one which is the final in Google Chrome. Here is the one that the way it should be at the end of the chapter, and this blog page does work, and they have changed these. If we look at the HTML in Dreamweaver here, we will be able to see that they have changed these to be some of the, see, there's the section aside. This is the one that's in the left bar. Then they've created the footer. So all of this is the code for what you just saw. So if there's any of it you don't understand, then let me know next time I see you. Or if you email me, I'm not sure what they're going to do about the weather tomorrow morning, but I will be either here and can answer questions, or I will be in class only from 9:30 to 10:45. And other than that, I can do a hangout with you if you would like. Testing. So here's where they test the header next. So what's wrong with the header anyway? A final test drive for headers. Now, if you have any problems with this, just remember, it's not going to make anything look different. But if you look at the code, it's going to be a lot more logical, structured code. Here's our unordered list. Here's how we use the class called selected. And if I look over here at my CSS, here is what that is. The selected one is going to have a different background color. And so that's the only change that's being made, because I want you to be sure to know what it is when you select the, there's a section ID, or I'm sorry, there's a section, and you don't have to give it a name because they've done this with an ID equals drinks. So they're formatting it according to that whole section, according to that. Here they have a section which they're calling the main section, and there's an ID set up for it. So you might say, what's the difference? Well, it's just that with HTML, it's a little more logical what's going on here with those elements. And there's the aside. So this is the completed one after you get done with the chapter. Okay, now in the part where it says there are no dumb questions, let's go back to those. It says we are doing a lot of work to add elements to the page. It looks exactly the same as it did before. Tell me again what all this is getting me. We've replaced a few elements and added a few elements. And in the process, we've added a lot of meaning to our pages. The browser search engines and applications for building web pages can, if they want, be a lot smarter about how they handle different parts of your page. And your page is easier for you and other web developers to read. Even though your page looks the same, it's a lot more meaningful under the covers. Let me look up here. 572 is where this is. So what's the difference between a section and an article? Well, you know, section, you remember, you need to know this for the quiz. Understand and be able to discuss this, because that's what is important about these selectors. Should every section and every article always have a header? Most of the time your sections and articles will have a header, or at least a heading like H1. So that's something to remember. So should we use header only? We've got more than one thing to put in it. What if we've only got one thing and nothing else? You can use header even if you have only one thing to put in it. So here's about div. Does that mean we're not ever going to use div? No. In case you haven't noticed, I'm being made mostly redundant. They're replacing me all over the place with these new elements. They haven't gotten rid of me, but if they keep inventing new elements, it won't be long before it's game over, man. So the last time I looked, you were still in the HTML specs. Web developers have all sorts of special needs for adding structure to their pages. So they have not deleted that div. So what they're saying is they're just going to have a more better purpose for the div instead of it just being kind of the collect all. Okay, so I think that gets us, we agree having multiple pages isn't going to do us much good if readers can't navigate between them. So that is actually missing on the blog page at the end of this chapter. So we want to be sure that we're not going to add these pages, it says, so they're leaving those blank. But here with the blog one, we want to be able to get to it, but we want to be able to get back to home also. So here's completing the navigation, what they did, adding the navigation CSS. So this code is in the starbuzz.css. Adding a nav element. Before we do any more testing, we really need to talk about your CSS. Okay, so best practices. Now, the textbook that I used to use had a whole page of best practices, and that's what your rubric comes from for your final project. In other words, some of the things that are considered best practices is making your CSS more specific. Let's use the fact that we have a nav element in HTML. So be sure you use that element instead of naming a class that, because there's no need. Some of the other things that used to be in the best practices are not there because well, they haven't put the HTML5 things in some of the best practices list. But here on the next page, we add a video in our blog, and they have the video there. And I know some of you are having some trouble with that on your final project site. Well, one thing you could do that would be to create a video explaining your site, and that it is an educational endeavor or something like that. You also could demonstrate something in a little video clip. So if you don't have one that you've gotten off of YouTube that is applicable to your site, create your own. You can do that right there in our classroom where we have the Macs with the camera. If you don't have that ability on your cell phone, on your smartphone, you do have that ability in the classroom. So students have asked me, is that required? And yes, it is. I prefer you create just a little clip of your own that might tell us something. Now, it also shows us on page 583, let me go there, some of the things that we need to consider when we're creating a video. How does the video element work? At this point, you've got a video up and playing on your page, but before we move on, let's step back and look at the video element and its attributes. So these are some of the attributes. The controls attribute cause the player to supply controls for controlling the video and audio playback. So if we go, let me see if this is the one that puts it in there. The autoplay, you should not have autoplay on. That's one of the best practices. That's good etiquette to have controls where they are able to turn it off and on. It's a Boolean attribute, which means it has two options, on or off. Poster will typically display one frame of the video as the poster image. There's a loop Boolean attribute. Now, the width and height attributes set the width and height of the video display known as the viewport. If you specify a poster, the poster image will be scaled to the width and height you specify. The video will also be scaled, but will maintain its aspect ratio. So if there's extra room on the sides or the top and bottom, the video will be letterboxed or pillar boxed to fit into the display area size. You should try to match the native dimensions of the video best performance, so the browser doesn't have to scale in real time. So yes, the controls are different with HTML video. We do this in Head First HTML5 programming. This is some things that it tells you that you can do, because we're just getting the basics of HTML5. But if you really want to learn to use HTML5 effectively, there's another Head First book, of course, free of charge out there on a PDF called HTML5 Programming. And it has JavaScript in it. What you need to know about video formats, and this is very important, be sure you read through this and know what you're creating when you create a video. Here's some of the popular encodings. MP4 container with H.264 video and AAC audio. It's licensed by MPEG. Then there's one called WebM, but it was designed by Google to work with VP8 encoded videos. It's supported by Firefox, Chrome, and Opera. So that means if you use this video, you would be taking a chance of it not opening in IE or Safari. So this is really still the best one to create your videos in. 8.264 is the industry darling, but not the reigning champ. So they're telling you some other things about options that you might come up with. And these are the file extensions that you see in the Chapter 12 folder for that video. MP4 and that WebM and OGG Theora. So here's how it works and the attributes that we've gone through. Now, so how do we juggle all these formats? Okay, let's go to 589. And here, how to juggle these. Notice we're removing the source attribute from the video tag and adding 3 source tags, each with its own source attribute, each with a version of the video in a different format. Sorry, your browser doesn't support the video element. This is what the browser shows if it doesn't support video. So the browser starts at the top and works its way down until it finds a format it can play. For each source, the browser loads the metadata. So it's sort of like when we do the font family style, we put 3, we can put up to 2 different fonts, and then we just put the group font family that we're using, so that if the computer doesn't have either one of those 2 fonts families, it can default to either sans serif or serif or decorative. There's a couple of others. So bulleted points on video are right here. Be sure you understand those. And then take 2 says lights, camera, action. And how to be even more specific with video is here. But what you want to be sure is that you do include the actual controls coming up. And if you don't put that on there, then they won't be able to see how to control the video. Would you believe we're really just getting started with video? And so that's right, markup is just the first step. With HTML5, you can also create interactive experiences around video by using JavaScript. And there again, that's in the a little bit further advanced stuff in the HTML5 programming book or PDF, whichever. And here it is right here. And it would be, if you're really interested in working with video on the web, that would be something really good to look into. Now, these are the elements that you need to know what they are for the test at the end. These are all HTML5 elements. So remember also that there is a requirement that you have a specific browser to be able to use these. Here's our bulleted points at the end of this chapter and our crossword puzzle. So just go over all these so that you understand these matching, and that will make the end of this chapter. Now, chapter 13, I believe I'm going to go ahead and stop here, and I will try to go ahead and do some lecturing over 13 and 14 here a little later on. I'll create another hangout and go through this, but basically 13 is just creating a table, and tables are just specifically for presenting data. And so you can style tables, but you don't want to use a table unless it's data that would be in something like a spreadsheet. And so in this chapter, they have you do a couple of things that actually on the journal page, they show you a nested table with the information of where he journaled his entries of where all he went. So used to, before we separated presentation in the progress of HTML1 up through HTML4 and XHTML, we would use tables for page layout with no borders. And so when we wanted an object in a specific location, we created a big table, and then sometimes we would merge rows or merge columns and cause it to those borders of those table cells to force it to position where we wanted it to. And so we don't want to use tables for page layout anymore. That's why we had those chapters on all the different page layouts that we can do with CSS. So at this point, chapter 13, you should be able to go through it pretty quickly, and there's bulleted points there on page 634. When you get finished, you'll have one table, and I believe that I also require you to put a table in your final project. It doesn't have to be a large table. There's no requirement on the size of the table. Now, the very last chapter of the book, which maybe I will just go ahead and do it right now, because it there again is just following everything in the book just to get the Starbuzz form up. And then I do require you to have some type of form on your website. So on Monday when we meet, which I heard the weather's supposed to be like 70, so it should not be an issue, we will get our form, and we will try to get it to work what form we're using. Because what I would want you to do on your final project, if you don't have a website that handles forms, then what we'll do is just send it in an email. There's ones here that it should show you how to send it directly to an email, your form information. So that should take us to the very end of the book. And so our final test is the one that will be over the bulleted points, the crosswords, anything in bold print. And if you've been using the CSS, then it will be a lot easier, I'm hoping, on the final quiz. So at the end of 14, there should also be, I don't see bulleted points there. That one's still 14. Let's see where they're at. 14, 14. Okay, they're on page 692, and there are quite a few of them there. So on Monday, I'll open up class by asking if you have any questions about these 3 chapters, and hopefully you will have viewed this video, and then we will spend the rest of the time preparing our final project for on Wednesday. All right. Have a good evening. If you get this too late and you still have some questions, you can email me and I will try to answer any questions you have, or if we need to get in a hangout tomorrow, I'll be able to do that. Have a good evening. I'm going to shut this down.